I want to tell you a story before we get started. And it's a story from the oldest democracy on the planet, at least the oldest democracy for humans, the Onondaga Nation. It's one of the Five Nations Confederacy up in upstate New York. The backstory for this is that after the downstream neighbor, which some of you attended and some of you spoke at, the Loretto community took seriously that challenge that we had from the floor from Professor Andrew Reed of Denver Law School, who said, how the heck can you Catholics stand up here and talk about nature when your Pope has not yet rescinded the doctrine of discovery? And I go, whoa, remember that moment? We sent a package of letters from 13 religious communities last Thanksgiving to Pope Francis, urging him to repudiate those papal bulls that instilled the doctrine of discovery into the continents, really, of the North and South hemispheres. Those 13 leadership of those religious communities represent some 40 or 50 congregations and somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 individuals in the Catholic Church. So I think we're late to the request, but we're there. So over that period of time, I was pretty involved in instigating that and made a lot of friends in that movement and learned about this story. And I tell the story because it's a story of the peacemaker. And we've been talking a lot about the environment and what it does for us as people. And we're in a time in history where it's what people do that's going to largely dictate what happens with the earth. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking, especially since taking a climate change course from the University of Melbourne in Australia on one of those online courses. I have to back up a little bit and just tell you, bear with me. I'm a river person, kind of at the mouth of the river, you know, where the river goes the slowest and winds around the most. So I'm not one of those straight pipes or channels. So just bear with me, I'm going to wander a little bit. I grew up on the Gulf Coast, and I'm very bonded with the Mississippi River. So the role of people was brought home to me by this professor at the University of Melbourne in Australia in the context of climate change. Australia's a little bit ahead of us in noticing that it's happening because they have all these islands around them that the people will flee from the islands to Australia when the water rises. So he was talking about how unique each one of those islands is in responding to the climate change and the rising sea level. It depends not just on their geology, but also on their culture, whether it's okay to just run uphill on your island or whether you'll be trespassing on somebody's land rights or maybe their communal rights. And it just, the whole emphasis he was making is on how people interact with each other in a time of crisis, which is coming for all of us and which will hit neighborhood by neighborhood distinctly. Some of those islands will not survive, and some of them will because of this combination of events, of factors, among which networking bonds of people to people are going to be very important. And it's neighborhood by neighborhood, which I think is borne out by the floods last fall, where you could just be a few blocks away and you didn't get hit by the flood. So knowing your neighbors and being able to work together with them in a crisis is going to be really, really important, even if they're on the other side of an ideological divide from you. So this is a story about the peacemaker. And it begins during a time of war. The Five Nations were at war with each other. And across the water in a stone canoe comes the peacemaker. He chose to come in a stone canoe so that the people would know he spoke the truth and had a clear mind. And as he spoke with individuals, they began to have a clear mind as well and accepted his message of peace. He came across a woman on the trail. It was her livelihood to provide food and shelter to the warriors who were going off to fight the other nation. And he talked with her, and she became of clear mind and accepted the message of peace. And as they talked, the role of women in the new law of peace became clear, and that was going to be to choose the chiefs and to make sure that they are of clear mind, and if they fall off of a clear mind, to replace them with someone who can stay of a clear mind. And so he got to the Onondaga Nation. It was the last one. All the others had accepted the message of peace. But in the Onondaga Nation was this twisted man who lived among them, his spine all contorted and his face horrible, his legs bent and his body filthy. It stank. This creature they called Tadodaho. And out of his head with his hair grew ravenous, snarling snakes. He lived in the bottom of a pit, and he trapped his food that way. He killed the daughters of the peacemaker's assistant and ate them. That was his tortured message to the people. The father of these children was the man we know as Hiawatha. He had been helping the peacemaker with his mission. He was devastated, stunned, stalled by his grief. No longer able to assist the peacemaker, he retreated into his grief, mourned the suffering caused to his daughters by such violence at the hands of the Tadodaho. And as he journeyed through the interior terrain of his grief, he began to string purple and white clamshells on strings to record what he learned about the depths of human experience and grief and despair. He shared his thoughts with others out of kindness to help those with a big grief to work back through to a clear mind. And this was the first wampum. As his mind cleared, he again began to assist the peacemaker. One day they were walking near the pit where the Tadodaho lived, in his deep pit. And when the Tadodaho looked up and saw the face of the peacemaker looking at him with compassion, he thought he was seeing his own reflection. And he began to think of himself as someone who might have something of goodness in him, might be of a clear mind. And over the months that followed, as he talked with the peacemaker and Hiawatha, he became of clear mind and did accept the message of peace, and was eventually selected by the clan mother to be the 50th chief. So the Six Nations held sacred ceremony to give thanks for the great law of peace, and the ceremony involved uprooting a great white pine and casting their weapons of war into the hole where the roots had been. Then the stream flowed through and carried away the weapons of war. And they put the tree back in where it belonged. And to this day, if you accept the great law of peace, you can sit with them under the great tree of peace. And the names of each chief passed down through the ages, and there is still a chief called Tadodaho, and I met him 2 weeks ago. And he is the spiritual leader of the Six Nation Confederacy. There are now 6 nations in it. So I wanted to start with that kind of paradoxical, puzzling story, but remember, I'm a river, and this is going somewhere. And I just thought that story was powerful enough for us to let it settle in and maybe turn to your neighbor and share what it might mean to you in the context we've been discussing today. Does anybody want to share anything that came out of their discussion? Just 1 or 2 people? Or we can just move on. Okay, great. Yeah. We'll have to stand close together. Or maybe by
The peacemaker, to me, was a reincarnated sort of higher being who came to remind us of the basic laws of how to be respectful of nature and follow paths that will preserve the earth.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else have something? How about a few words about the Tadodaho? Yes. If you could come here so you can be on the mic.
I come from the Mohawk Nation, and I just want to say that one of the most important messages of this was the equality of the women with the men. That's the most important thing. And at this time, it's the women who must speak for this planet to come into balance.
Thank you. Well, I speak it. Come on up. Or you could speak from there.
I have a big feminine side. I have a very big feminine side, and I usually don't speak in front of public, but when I saw Norma come here into the conference, I don't know if people know, but her and her husband really, this is Unity Church, that's her. And I've known Norma for probably way over 20 years. And when we have people like Norma and all of you involved in such a wonderful cause, it really moves me. And I feel like I have hope. And God bless you. I thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for that comment. Okay. Well, I will say that reading about the Tato Daho makes me think of times when I've needed to turn to someone else for help in combing the snakes out of my hair. That we all have that need and that potential. So I'll move on to some description of earth jurisprudence, which in the context today I'd like to describe as Vandana Shiva describes it, as earth democracy. And so the more we learn about the science of the earth and how biology works, the more we understand that it's nested holes of self-organizing communities in nature at every levels. It's like Russian dolls, only they're alive. It's like our bodies. We have cells and they group together and they form little communities and they do what they need to do. And it's all connected. It's all intelligent. Now I'm going into the Bioneers theory thing. But Cormac Cullinan, who wrote a book called Wild Law, it's a manifesto of earth justice. He criticizes the anthropocentric view of law as, he says it's all about humans. The Constitution, it's all about humans. He says it's as though we're thinking that we live in a body and like we're the liver and we're in charge of the body. We've got the relationships askew. And in my work with the letter to the papacy about the papal bulls that instigated the doctrine of discovery, the more I learned about what that was about, basically you could say empire is what it's about. It's a justification for empire. It's all about exceptionalism. It's about the few who can control the many. It's about total disregard of nature. So when Christopher Columbus came over and planted a flag on the land, and his priest read something in Spanish to the natives, they were then advised that they were no longer the owners of their land, and the King of Spain now was their lord, and they were being given the great gift of European civilization now and Christianity, and if they wouldn't accept it, he could kill them. So now we have, I think, a lot of that same pattern of living embedded in our government. There's a trail I can make for you through the papal documents. The Pope was a civil authority back then, and so that was the basis of title to land in these continents. It's still the basis of title. It's the basis to the title to the house I own, is that we stole it from the Indians and claimed it in that fashion, Columbus or someone like him planting a flag. And taking all this the stance based on privilege. In that era, it was privilege on the basis of being a Christian and a European, and they were not, so they were less, they were other. Okay, so fast forward to today, when we have the towns on the Front Range that we've talked about all day, saying we want to govern ourselves, basically. You know, my home is my castle, and so my neighborhood is my town is my castle. We can set the boundaries where we live, right? We can say some of this, but none of that, and just be respected because it's, you know, self-determination. The critters do it. They organize themselves into small communities. But no, the state comes down, activated by the corporate rights. The corporations say, well, we already had a plan for your town. And we had talked to the legislature 20 years ago, and we have this law in place. And we have, by the way, usurped your Bill of Rights, which was the only thing worth anything in your Constitution. It was supposed to protect individuals from their government. But now we have captured the Bill of Rights, the corporations have. And so we have the right to do what we're doing, and we've also got an argument to preempt whatever it is you want to do in your local town. I think that's also doctrine of discovery thinking. I think that's still the empire thinking. I think it's part of the DNA of this culture, this settler culture. Meanwhile, thank goodness, the indigenous peoples are still here. The policy of extermination, which was an official policy, it was an active policy about the time that Colorado became a state, didn't work. There's still some indigenous people here. And they are still, for example, it's been a dreadful story for them, but it touches me that at least in one place in North America, they're still on the same land that they were always on, and that's the Onondaga people. So I give some, the Six Nations people. I'm no expert. You could say much better what that all means, but the connection to place, and having been there and known how the plants and animals and how it all is a cycle, and I'm just learning about this myself, but to be embedded in the natural world is the proper role of the human. Surprise to the settlers. So Earth democracy is trying to learn, at best, learn from the indigenous wisdom. Not that we really know what that's about, but a respect for what they know. And some of what informs Earth jurisprudence or Earth democracy is science that's making it loud and clear and hard to deny that we're not in separate silos. That's not how the universe works. The air that I breathe is the air that you breathe, and skin isn't really much of a barrier, although it seems like it. We're all in the same soup, and what I do is not just going to affect me, it's going to affect you, even if you're across the world. So it's been a question for me for 30, 35 years. It started out being something like, oh, wow, I'm becoming a lawyer, and golly gee whiz, all the assumptions in law, I mean, like they don't feel right, you know, and I thought, well, maybe it's because I'm a woman, and I go through the halls of the law school, and I find the first woman in the, the class picture, and she was there in a certain year, 1903 or something like that, and I go down to the next year, 1904, she's gone, except for this little faded picture that says, in memoriam. And so I think, it must be because I'm a woman in the law school. You know, that must be the reason. No, I don't think so anymore. I think it's because of this pattern of thinking. The pattern of thinking that we're actually, even in our culture, our settler culture, we're living through a paradigm shift. I mean, a lot of us, here we are, and there's lots like us who don't think that competition is the way to go. We are not really fond of hierarchy. We really don't put all our energy behind domination or exceptionalism or privilege. We're more aware that resilience in a living system is based on diversity. Rather than finders keepers, which is the rule of Colorado water law, we tend to think it's not about capturing the land, it's more about belonging to the land. And so we're in the middle of a paradigm shift. And then if we get involved in a lawsuit, it's sort of like cognitive dissonance. It's like, what world am I in now? Well, you're in the world of empire. You're in the world of the doctrine of discovery. You're back there with Christopher Columbus. So earth jurisprudence is kind of a emerging discipline of what would it be like if we had laws for humans that were kind of like laws that the rest of the world that we're embedded in lives by. What if we lived by the laws of nature? There are a few legal efforts. There's 2 law schools in Florida that are studying, that have a certificate program in earth jurisprudence. There's an Earth Law Center in Santa Monica, California. The broad way of looking at it, which is like a biomimicry way, which is what would nature do? Just study nature and then try to elicit how does an old growth forest govern itself? And try to imagine how will the laws emerge how would you write a constitution that was like, how does an old growth forest manage itself? I'd love to be involved in that. I keep trying to get to it, but there's all these other things I had to do. So what has emerged as the priority of the earth jurisprudence movement in the US is this rights of nature movement. And you can, of course, Google rights of nature. You probably all know all of this because Boulder Rights of Nature has sponsored this program. And even with rights of nature, it's like, how do you actually craft a law that will be implementable when you're interested in promoting the rights of a river to flow, for example. Or here's one I like. It's like, water has the inalienable right to unimpeded participation in the Earth's hydrologic cycle. So that's one that I would like to see out there. Water has an inalienable right to unimpeded participation in the Earth's hydrologic cycle. So I had a lot I was thinking about sharing from Thomas Berry of a philosophical nature. And again, you're probably familiar with him, but he called himself a geologian because he learned from Earth rather than a theologian from learning from you know who. He called himself a geologian, and he was very influential in his own religious tradition, which was Catholicism, and I think he helped a lot of us move along. He said, Earth is a community of subjects, not a collection of objects. Peter Brown is someone who's caught my attention too. And I like him because he's asking questions with a group that he's working with, sort of like the questions I'm asking about law, along with the other lawyers I'm working with. And Peter Brown is working on the economy. He's asking those questions about the economy. Peter G. Brown says even the Declaration of Independence needs to be improved upon. It's not about individual rights, it's about the interdependence. He's a thinker among the Quakers, and as long as I'm here, I'll mention the Quaker Institute of the Future is looking for people to participate in a study group on, it's called a committee of concern toward developing a pamphlet on water ethics. And so Peter G. Brown would be a good place to start. He's got a book on that. And the people who have the table back there where clean water is a human right, that banner is there. They are in touch with David Grunfeld at the Water Ethics Institute in Santa Fe. Some of us met him at the Downstream Neighbor back in January of 2012. So there's lots of good material to start with. If you wanted to get a little group of 10 or 12, I'd love to be part of it. And I wanted to mention that, Peter G. Brown. I also had put flyers over there of an article we published in the Loretto Earth Network News that reprinted one of his articles on democracy in the Anthropocene, which is the geologic era that human behavior has created. We've turned a corner from the proliferation of life in the passing era, which was called the moment that is rather sad. We wouldn't want to have given the name of humans to this particular geologic era that's coming. So that's wandered around enough. Let me talk a little bit about one effort to bring these lofty ideas down into practicality in a legal document, and that has to do with ballot initiative number 75. So 75 is the Community Rights Ballot Initiative, and it is based on the inalienable right, if you will, to govern ourselves in our local communities. It also participates in our right to change our form of government if it is not serving its proper role. So we're being kind of like the clan mothers here, saying, it's not working. Duh. So I'll get to the measure, the elements of the measure in just a moment. But about on that topic of it's not working, I got a letter from the Waterkeeper Alliance. Bobby Kennedy wrote me, Bobby Kennedy Jr. wrote little old me, and he's talking about the trouble that water is in, that our rivers are in. Of course, he mentions the Duke Energy coal ash spill on the Dan River in North Carolina that polluted up to 70 miles of the river with 40,000 tons of toxic heavy metal-laced coal ash, causing the third largest spill of its kind in U.S. history. And then he goes into the statistics. 15 million of the world's children under age 5 die every year from polluted water. 46% of U.S. lakes and 40% of our rivers are polluted and unsafe to use. 70% of U.S. industrial waste is dumped into our usable water sources. 1.2 trillion gallons of untreated sewage is dumped into U.S. waters annually. That's the U.S. stuff. Here we are 42 years after the enactment of the Clean Water Act, and instead of clean water, we continue to face dramatic weakening of this and other environmental laws authored to protect this life-sustaining resource. In fact, an estimated 60% of U.S. waters and tens of millions of acres of wetlands have lost federal protection in just the last few years. So the regulatory system that was designed to solve these problems is not working. Industry has captured it. It's a story we could tell. I won't go into a lot of the detail. Some people say the regulatory system is working just great for those it was intended to protect, which are the industries, and that the only people it regulates are the activists, because it gives us only a small thing to talk about when we go up for our 3 minutes of fame in front of the regulatory body, and all we can talk about is parts per million. And if we talk about climate change, or if we talk about the collapsing ecosystems, or if we talk about our obligation to our children, you know, they'll smile at us and say, thank you for coming. But it does not compute. It is not part of the calculus that's built into the law that they can even legally consider. So it's parts per million, that's all you can talk about. It's a license to pollute to a certain extent, but and the extent gets larger, and then the cumulative impact isn't considered. So the regulatory system, it's a good place to educate the public and a good place to protest in front of, but it's not solving the problem. So back to ballot initiative number 75. And I brought a few. I thought that the table with the petition would have copies, but I was mistaken about that. So I bought a few copies of the text. If anybody wants to ask a question on the details of it in a moment, they will be there for you. It does the thing that I just first said. It recognizes the right to local self-government. We think that is already part of our democratic system of government. Some of the local town lawyers don't remember that. And so we thought it might be helpful just put it in the Constitution so they can, look it up when they're doing their legal research. It would be in the Constitution, not a statute. And this is part of the initiative, which is our right as people in a democracy in Colorado. Okay, so then the second section talks about how you implement that right to local self-government. And it starts getting down specifics into law. It says the people in a local community, and we're talking a local community would be defined by your local government jurisdiction, like a county or a town or a city, a home rule city, statutory city. So the people would have the power to enact local laws that protect the health, safety, and welfare by establishing fundamental rights of individuals, their communities, and nature, and by securing those rights using prohibitions and other means. So this is about drawing out from that Ninth Amendment those unenumerated rights that we all have and that we never surrendered to the government. Certain rights, such as clean water, clean air, the right to a sustainable energy future, the right to peaceful enjoyment of our homes, whatever right you think you have that you need to protect. Having a flourishing natural world that has rights of its own. And then Section 2 also talks about how you secure those rights. And this is where it gets interesting because, as I said, corporations have captured the Bill of Rights, and they think their use of the Bill of Rights is more important than ours. Well, in this situation where we are defining fundamental rights in a local community, we're going to say, well, that won't make any sense unless we create a little boundary around those rights where corporations can't come in to interfere with those rights. They're fine in our town as long as they respect our rights. It's sort of back to my home is my castle, You can come in, but no smoking in my house. Do that somewhere else. So you can come into my community and have your business, but don't interfere with these rights that we have. Well, of course, it might be a corporation that has a state statute sitting over here or in their hip pocket. And they say, well, I can get in there because state's going to help me. I say, oh, well, we forgot to mention that we also have a shield against state preemption if it's going to come in and mess with our rights. So that's the basic content of ballot initiative number 75. It doesn't change anything if it passes. It doesn't in and of itself change anything, except that it answers those questions that those city attorneys always have, like, you can't do that. I go, well, do your research and look at that new Section 32, or maybe it'll be a different section depending on how many other proposed Section 32s get passed. But it's ballot initiative number 75, and if the city attorney looks at it, they go, oh, well, let's see, I'm going to think of something, and you can't do it, but I guess you can try. I guess you can put it together. So I'd love it if you had questions or if you wanted to have any discussion about that or about the rights of nature controversy that recently happened in Boulder County. And please go to the floor mic. Go ahead.
One thing we did as we were thinking about rights of nature was to look up the constitutions of Ecuador and Peru. And I recommend that as basic reading for everybody, because those are two places that where indigenous peoples are the majority of the people. And if you read that, I can't repeat it, and I wish I'd brought copies with me. It reads entirely differently from our Enlightenment-based constitution, which is all about the optimism of science and rational thinking. And it's just worth seeing how cultures can organize their relationship to the land in an entirely different way, because there's a relationship to the land. So one of the problems I see with this debate is that we've got to learn how we're using Enlightenment kind of language to change the problems of Enlightenment optimism. And when you preach to the choir, it may work, but when you preach to 90% of the people, it won't mean very much. And there is a real need to change the way we talk about these things so that it has more meaning to people. One of the ways to do that is to go to places where indigenous peoples have defined this for themselves, and it is so different, it's just, it makes your heart throb. So that's mine.
Thank you very much.
Well, along those lines, I really love this initiative. And yet, as I carry mine around with me, and I haven't started yet, I want to know, if you were standing in front of a person and asking for their signature, what would be your short spiel that actually, convinced them that they should sign this and not any of those other things that are, masquerading as this?
Well, I wouldn't mention any other things. And in fact, I'm not sure how many others are going to survive the gauntlet that you have to run to get even to the point where you can collect signatures. So the slogan that was on that banner, local community rights over corporate rule, prioritize local community rights over corporate rule. And I love the way they say rights of individuals, communities, and nature, because it really starts that process of transitioning from Enlightenment language into native language, in the sense that you start with individuals. We all know, individuals have rights, And then the next word is communities. Now, communities? How can communities have rights? You should have seen the briefs we got at the Supreme Court, the objections of communities. What's a community right? Then nature's rights. Oh my goodness. But it's a continuum. It's a continuum. And so that's one good start. I've been through the training for, getting petition signatures. I'll know a lot more tomorrow at 1 o'clock when I finish my shift at the People's Fair in collecting signatures. But I plan to emphasize the responsibility of a local community to set their vision and stand by it. Yeah.
Yeah, but the issue of preemption, it seems like you have to speak about that, don't you? So that they know what it is?
Well,
know
they-
how it's different now? It would be different if we pass this.
Sure, you can say that, but we're not supposed to really preach about this when we're soliciting signatures. We're supposed to say, this is a proposal, and describe it in a sentence or two, and would you like it to be on the ballot so that voters can consider it and vote on it? If you get a question, what is this preemption thing about? It's like, well, if you're really going to have local self-government, you'll need to have boundaries around how far the state can intrude in your local decisions. Some of the questions we get are oh gosh, some rogue community is going to run off and pass a local law endorsing slavery or something like that. And we did carefully draft this to prevent that. Somebody's going to try it maybe, but they're not going to make it, because you're not allowed in a local law to weaken protections that already exist, or interfere with rights that already exist at the state, national, or federal level. Okay. What we're doing with this language is to shield individual community and nature, the rights of individuals, communities, and nature from corporations and other businesses who claim rights that would interfere with the local rights of individuals, communities, and nature. We're not saying they won't have any rights. They're welcome in our town as long as they don't interfere with individuals, communities, and nature's rights. And it puts responsibility on the people of a local town to define and act and enact these laws at the local level. If they don't, then this will mean nothing in your town. And maybe you won't have a need for it because maybe you don't experience some kind of threat to your inherent rights in your town. So then you don't have to do anything. But if you do feel you have to protect your rights, you'll have a mechanism to do that. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do have another question. One aspect of our culture is our media, and not only that we're less educated, we are misinformed and to the point of damage from the media. Is there a way that these community rights could address the media's responsibility to the citizens and the profession?
I'm really not the expert on that. This is going to be a band of volunteers like you had, and we're going to be the hobbits out there marching into Mordor, and we're just going to be there saying this is what we believe we need, and what we have isn't working. Do you think it's working? Do you think the Earth is in better shape, than it was 40 years ago? We think this can begin a movement. Now, obviously, one town who enacts their version of a local law along these lines isn't going to overcome the threat of climate change. But if we can build a movement of enough people who understand that we have three judicially generated doctrines, interpretations of the Constitution that the people never voted in and that are impeding the people's right to govern themselves, and that something along this line is tailored to address each of those three so that the people can get their power back to govern themselves. The more that spreads, the more we can start working on state constitutions and eventually the national constitution if we have enough time before the planet dries up. The three judicial doctrines are Dillon's rule. That basically says that a local government is the child of the state and can only do what the parent says it can do. That whole package of corporate rights, when they captured the Bill of Rights through all kinds of things, like culminating most recently in Citizens United saying that they have the right of free speech, which means they can buy all the political offices that they can afford. That's one of the doctrines that this is carefully tailored to overcome. And the third one is preemption, which we're familiar with. And this is carefully tailored to overcome. And each provision is necessary if we are going to stand by the premise of our democratic institutions. Granted, it was built in the age of enlightenment, which we've moved beyond, but it is built on the premise that the source of government is the people, and that the people remain sovereign and have retained rights that they have not surrendered to their government. So if we believe in that, this is a well-structured way to get back to that. We need to get to the mic.
Libby, I had a question. This would also apply, this notion of self-governance of the people would also apply beyond kind of corporate environmental degradation. It would also apply, I understand, to like economic issues or any issue really that the local community made a decision on would come under this. Is that correct?
That's correct. In Spokane, they were working on a Vision Spokane project, and they were working with the whole collaboration of labor rights people and as well as community rights, environmental rights, and so forth. Phil, did you have a question? You don't want to walk to the mic? You want to come up here? We like to record what you say, Phil.
It's just a comment, on some experience on this. You're not going to have much time with these people when you talk to them. So you've got to have a spew that is very short. And the shortest one I can think of offhand is, do you think people of your city should have a right of self-determination? And it will be, if it gets on the ballot, it will be a question. So you're asking a question that will get on the ballot. And they're supposed to read it. But you don't have much time, so you've got to keep it simple, and you've got to get to the very essence of what it is you're about, and it's self-determination, in my opinion. But you can use whatever term you want.
Thank you. That's real helpful. I haven't been studying how to collect signatures because I've been writing briefs. But that's real helpful. Okay. So I'm surprised we didn't get a discussion about the difficulties of the rights of nature and some of the pushback. And I did read what was in the press about that. And I sorted it into 5 categories. One is about competition, individual competition, an individual of one species, namely human, competing with an individual of another species, such as, I won't be able to geld my stallion because then it will interfere with nature's right to regenerate itself. Or if the fox is in the hen house, I can't hurt the fox. So I just wanted to comment that, and I'm sure that a lot of this is because these ideas seem new to so many people that haven't been aware of the rights of nature worldwide. But it's about the way that nature is whole maintaining. It's about the whole. It doesn't ignore individual rights, but we'd have to draft an ordinance, I guess, that makes that clear to people who have a reductionist type of thinking that is so common in our culture. The other theme was ideological competition. There goes Boulder again. They're greener than thou, which is like, I'm pretty green, but I'm not going to go that far to the rights of nature. And I think that is going to involve some better level of education as to why it's necessary to shift from a regulatory approach to a rights approach, because the regulatory system is not really working for these rivers that are dying. It's not working for seed integrity. It's not working for so many things. The regulatory case law is going to place you right into the preemption diagram, and the state will trump the local so much of the time. Whereas the rights line of cases emphasizes that the lower you get, the closer to the grassroots, the more you can expand the definition of rights. So in terms of where our jurisprudence, which is the case law, where our case law is now, rights is very favorable to move to. Another theme is it's unconstitutional, it can't be implemented. There's no such thing as rights of nature in our Constitution. That's right, that's the problem. And then there's the one that's going to give unintended consequences of a disastrous nature, which is like doing away with the Voting Rights Act, or doing away with the rights of the gay rights, right. So we think we've drafted it so that can't happen. We've been very careful about that, as I said, and you can take a copy and see what you think. And then one that's kind of hard is it harms the poor, because if one town protects themselves but the next town doesn't, because it maybe doesn't have the resources or doesn't have the sophistication like Boulder has, or then they'll move over there and that town will suffer. And that is the hardest one that I think is there. And the hope is that the movement will grow, people will become more fluent with this approach, and it will spread to every town. Anything else? I know it's been a long day. Sure.
So I'm just wanting to ask you if we're looking at the rights of nature, and I'm just trying to get an idea of if I lived in a community where it was obvious that this river, that's part of our community, goes through our community, is suffering and is being used to extinction, then our whole community could come together and draft something that would protect the rights of this river. I mean, is it a community responsibility again? Is it, it would be.
It would be the responsibility of some resident of that community.
Uh-huh.
And it would depend on how the local law was crafted. We're anticipating that it would be something similar like to what Lafayette did. In the local law, it says any resident or citizen, I don't know exactly which word it used, of Lafayette, it's a local law, can file a lawsuit on behalf of nature. So, yeah.
Okay.
That's how you would do it.
All right. Thank you.
On the right, enforcing the rights of that river.
One of the issues that's been brought up locally is the precautionary principle and the fact that people are scared of that. I've always thought it would be a good idea to have the precautionary principle for nature, for public health, for things like that, which we don't have a lot of times. And how does this relate to that, and how can we deal with that concern? Because a lot of people feel that would shut down too many economic projects and this and that. And, it seems like we apply a precautionary principle to short-term profit, but we don't to things that are really long-term. So any comments on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, very well stated. And this ballot initiative 75 does not address the precautionary principle. I think it was yours that does, Wes, number 103. And 82, I think, had it, but they didn't go forward with 82. So the precautionary principle you're familiar with, it's like the physicians do no harm, and it would be the burden of someone who's wanting to put chemicals into the water to prove that those would not hurt anybody. And then the business community says, well, that's going to harm the business. Well, if you don't have it, it harms the people. I mean, take your choice. But so what we have now, for example, fracking is like a classic case where, because business has all these rights to go out and explore and be entrepreneurial and create these chemical recipes, they didn't have to have them approved. They just, that's developing their business. If the precautionary principle had been in place, they wouldn't have been able to start fracking until they had revealed what was in the formula and done some studies and proved, in a hearing that it was safe on top of all the other pollutants that are already here. So we have to make some value-based decision, which is kind of back to that Quaker Institute of the Future project that I would encourage people who can to participate in, to get clear on our values as to how many of your children would you like to get cancer in order to have a high-end lifestyle? You know, how many children in Bangladesh do you want to flood out in order to keep driving your SUV? You know, if it's an economic question, we have to talk about the externalities that we are driving with our economic focus. Your name is Namisha? Neshama.
Was it Stephen who mentioned the laws, Ecuador laws? Wasn't it true that in Ecuador the people were defending the trees as the lawsuit? They felt that the trees needed someone to represent themselves, and I'm thinking that in our situation here with fracking that we could represent the water. You know, we could represent, I mean, whether it's the Colorado River or any body of water that a fracking company and operator would use. If we had Initiative 75, if it was in law, then we would be able to say, we speak for this water, and the water doesn't want to get fracked, so you can't do it.
I love that question, by the way, that you started out your panel with. And, you know, a lot of people would say, oh, you're anthropomorphizing water. You're attributing human qualities to the water. And I'm wondering why we thought we were the only ones that had those qualities. Anybody else want to say anything? Sure.
You mentioned three judicial. Hello. Okay. You mentioned three judicial principles to overcome Dillon's rule, preemption, and what was the third?
Corporate rights and privileges. Okay, Kristen, you gave me a poem at the beginning. Did you want me to read it? Do you want to read it to close the session?
You can, if you want to.
Carolyn, did you have something else to say?
Well, I'm just responding to what you just said. You know, this notion that we're separate from the water, and you know, we will die without water in a few days. I mean, the idea that we're separate is insane.
Well, I just think this has been a wonderful gathering. I'm so honored to be asked to speak here, and I hope I didn't wander too much. I'm right in the tradition with Phil, if I did, but Phil didn't wander today. So, as an element of ceremony, I would like to read the opening poem as the closing poem. Long ago, on a journey, I discovered a river. It was scarcely a child, a dog, a bird, that newly born river. It was gurgling and moaning among the stones of the iron-stained Sierra. It was begging for life between the solitudes of sky and snow. In the distance, high up, I was as weary as an old horse next to the wild creature that was beginning to run, to jump and to grow, to sing in a clear voice, to know the earth, stones, passing time, to travel night and day, to become thunder, until getting dizzy, until entering the calm, until growing wide and bringing water, until becoming patriarchal and sailed upon this small river, small and clumsy as metallic fish, shedding scales as it passes, drops of assaulted silver, a river crying to be born, growing before my eyes. There, in the mountain ranges of my country, at times and long ago, I saw, touched, and heard that which was being born. A heartbeat, a sound among the stones was that which was being born.